Donald Trump is at the White House right now, about to sign an executive order prohibiting transgender women from participating in women's or girls' sports. Joining us now, Purdue University professor of American Studies and Women's Gender and Sexuality Studies, Cheryl Cookie. Before we go to this, Cheryl, I want to just play a little bit of sound from the president signing this order.
To the Trump administration, we will defend the proud tradition of female athletes, and we will not allow men to beat up, injure, and cheat our women and our girls. From now on, women's sports will be only for women.
This was such a big campaign issue, and a lot of parents felt like it was just something that was fundamentally unfair to have transgender boys play with girls because of the just the dynamics, the bodily dynamics there. I'm just curious, what are the actual numbers on this? How many instances of transgender girls were playing in women's sports?
Yeah, I think this is really the ban or I should say the executive order is really a solution in search of a problem. That if we look at the numbers of transgender athletes who are participating in sports, the estimates are really although it's estimated to be around 10 athletes. I believe the NCAA president came out and spoke to Congress that he knows of 10 athletes who are competing at the NCAA level. High school level estimates are a bit tougher to pin down, although I've seen researchers throw out, 10, 20, 40, possibly 100 athletes that are identifying as transgender, and take into consideration that at the NCAA level, there's 544,000 athletes who are participating. So that's 10 athletes out of 544,000. And then the millions of girls that are participating in high school sports. We're maybe talking about, a handful of athletes in those at that level of competition as well. And so there are some states that have bans against transgender participation even before the executive order went into place. A state like Utah, where in fact there was really no transgender athlete that had been identified as participating at the high school level. So certainly this is a political
let me
issue.
get these numbers up there. We have the Utah governor, Spencer Cox. Here's the numbers that he cited. 75,000 high school kids participating in high school sports, 4 transgender kids playing in high school sports in Utah, 1 transgender student playing in girls sports. So, I mean, it's not 0, but one in the entire state of Utah. The numbers are really small. And I point that out because it became such a big campaign issue. It made it seem like it was happening everywhere, and that every, girls team was at risk of either having unfair competition or, as the president just said, being beat up by somebody. I'm struggling to understand, unless it's just a pure politics play, why there is so much attention on an issue that is just so infinitesimally small. And you're just talking about a handful of kids. Yeah. You're really just targeting a handful of kids.
Yeah, and I think the point that you're making is spot on, right? That the bans aren't about transgender participation. This isn't about saving women's sports or protecting girls and women in sports. And if so, then we really should be focusing on the actual issues that are threats to girls and women in sports, such as the lack of access and opportunity, the lack of funding, the lack of media coverage, sexual abuse and harassment in sports spaces, right? The ban itself, I think, is part of a larger context by which there's an effort to reassert conventional and traditional gender norms in society. This is part of a larger attack on bodily autonomy for women and for folks who identify as women. And so really for me, as a scholar who studies sports, it's such an interesting site for thinking through the ways in which sport isn't necessarily reflecting gender as it exists in our society, but sport really plays a powerful role in sort of constituting gender, right? So the reassertion of biological difference between men and women can really happen in the space of sports because it is sex segregated.
Yeah, it feels like a proxy to politically capitalize on a social issue, social fears and discomfort in this country. Again, Donald Trump just signing this executive order. Cheryl Cookie, thanks so much for joining us and helping us understand just the raw data on this. I think it's important context that everybody could use.